Welcome to this week's Acts Bible study. We are looking at Acts chapter 22 and part of 23, and it is April 3rd, 2026. Here, Acts 22, verse 30 through 23, verse 11. The commander still wanted to know the truth about why Paul was being accused by the Jews. Therefore, the next day he ordered the chief priests and the entire Jerusalem council to assemble. Then he took Paul out of prison and had him stand before them. Paul stared at the council and said, "Brothers, I have lived my life with an altogether clear conscience, right up to this very day." The high priest Ananias ordered those standing beside Paul to strike him in the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God is about to strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit and judge me according to the law, yet disobey the law by ordering that I be struck." Those standing near him asked, "You dare to insult God's high priest?" Paul replied, "Brothers, I wasn't aware that he was the high priest. It is written, 'You will not speak evil about a ruler of your people.'" Knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, Paul exclaimed in the council, "Brothers, I'm a Pharisee and a descendant of Pharisees. I am on trial because of my hope in the resurrection of the dead." These words aroused a dispute between the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. This is because Sadducees say that there's no resurrection, angel, or spirit, but Pharisees affirm them all. Council members were shouting loudly. Some Pharisees who were legal experts stood up and insisted forcefully, "We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or angel has spoken to him?" The dispute became so heated that the commander feared they might tear Paul to pieces. He ordered soldiers to go down and remove him by force from their midst. Then they took him back to the military headquarters. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Be encouraged. Just as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so too you must testify in Rome." Today we are going to talk about parts of two chapters of Acts. We're going to do 22 and the first part of chapter 23, because all of this is what happens next after Paul is in Jerusalem and the crowds have decided that they don't like who he is and what he has to say. So chapter 22 begins with him addressing the crowd, trying to explain who he is, and also tell them about what he's done. He shares his conversion narrative, the story about when he was on the road to Damascus. He tells that, and then tells how he started preaching about Jesus, basically becoming a missionary to the Gentiles. And then they get very upset, and the crowd, wants him away. And so the Roman officials actually take him in, and they're going to torture him to find out why it is that the crowd was yelling at him. And then he says, "Can you legally whip a Roman citizen who hasn't been found guilty in court?" So all of a sudden, the Roman officials realize, this guy, we don't know who he is, but he says he's a Roman citizen. And so then we get to the verses that you heard from the slides before you saw my lovely face. And Paul is standing in front of the Jewish council because the Roman commander wants to understand what's happening, but can't torture Paul to get answers from him. So Paul stands before the council, and he gives this short speech. I mean, undoubtedly some of these people had already heard his story to the crowd outside, and he gives this speech. And of course, they don't like that he's saying something that's in opposition to them. But Paul shows some savvy, but also that he knows what's going on when he says that he's on trial because of his hope in the resurrection of the dead. And this is an interesting moment for us. We don't always think about the Jewish leaders having theological differences, but the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who made up the council of leaders that Paul was talking to, they didn't all agree on all of their theology. And so the Pharisees believed in the resurrection of the dead. It was a fairly new theological idea at the time, and the Sadducees didn't. And so this was a pretty significant debate. Obviously, things were pretty volatile. If the chief priest was willing to tell them to slap Paul in the face, things were not just calm to start out with. And so Paul begins he stokes a little bit of a debate, but also he's showing that by saying that he believes in the hope of the resurrection of the dead, he has something in common with the Pharisees, and also what he's preaching about Jesus and Jesus's resurrection is plausible if he's a Pharisee who believes in the resurrection of the dead. And so he's trying to find some common theological ground with some of them, as well as telling them, what he believes and sharing the message and the gospel that he has shared with lots of other people all over the world. And so then the Sanhedrin, the council kind of falls into chaos, and the Roman leaders are again concerned that Paul is going to be injured by the crowd, so they take him away. And this is the moment when he learns that next he will go to Rome. And so we'll move ever toward Rome, which we know is where Paul died. And next week we'll talk about how that starts happening after he has met with the council in Jerusalem and tangled with the Roman authorities as well. So take a look at Acts 22 and 23. In some ways, it's a bit of a review because Paul shares that story of his conversion, but it's also another moment of we learn something interesting about the Jewish leaders, and we see them as not just these bad people, but they had conversations, they had disputes, they had processes that they were trying to work through that they believed were the way they were supposed to do it. And Paul and the other apostles and the Christians, or the ones who followed the way, were bringing in something different. And of course, if you know much about church, which maybe you don't, but doing something different and starting change always causes ripples. And so we see that, and we have seen that, but Paul is reassured that God is with him even in the midst of now he's going to be heading toward Rome. So I know it's Good Friday, and we have Holy Saturday is tomorrow. Take some time to reflect on what Saturday must have been like for Jesus's first disciples, for the women who were prepared to go to the tomb. And then I hope you'll be able to celebrate Easter on Sunday, wherever you go Sunday mornings. If you go to a Sunday morning church, or here at the Wesley Foundation, we'll have supper and an Easter egg hunt and celebrate Easter here at the Wesley Foundation too. And next week, we'll be back to look at the second half of Acts 23 and Acts 24. And I'll see you then. Bye.